General Hospital spoilers teaser. Michael's return to Port Charles was not just dramatic, it was seismic. He didn't drift back quietly or ease into the familiar rhythms of his old life. Instead, he roared in like a tempest, tearing through months of absence with a singular, blazing determination, to reclaim his role as a father and fight for full custody of Wiley and Amelia. His reappearance at the nurses' ball was nothing short of shocking. As the lights still glowed from the stage and the audience buzzed from the children's sweet performance, Michael emerged from the shadows like a man on a mission. Without hesitation, he strode forward, scooped Wiley into his arms in a stunning display of paternal assertion, and vanished before Willow or Drew could fully comprehend what was happening. It was not just a reunion, it was a statement that he was back. And he intended to take what he believed was rightfully his. At Carly's house, the scene played out differently. Amelia had been eagerly waiting, nestled in her grandmother's arms, her tiny hands clutching a drawing she had made for her absent father. The moment Michael stepped through the door, Amelia ran to him, and for a brief, fleeting second, everything looked picture perfect. Laughter echoed through the living room, Carly's eyes welled with emotion. And even those who had harbored doubts about Michael's return were silenced by the raw joy etched on the faces of the children. To the outside world, it was the image of a father redeemed. A broken family being pieced back together. But behind the warmth of those embraces and the softness of the smiles lay a truth that Michael had buried deep. A truth that he knew could unravel everything. Because not far from that scene of domestic bliss was Sasha, quietly enduring the burden of a secret that had become too heavy to carry alone. Michael knew he couldn't avoid her forever. The moment they were alone, standing in the quiet grandeur of the Quartermaine estate, the weight of their shared past pressed down on them both. He met her eyes, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or guilt, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Michael approached her not with affection, not with compassion, but with clinical detachment. The night they had shared, one fueled by confusion, vulnerability, and misplaced longing, had left behind something far more lasting, a child. For Sasha, that child was a symbol of resilience, a piece of love born from chaos. But for Michael, it was a liability. He saw it as a threat to the fragile ground he was trying to rebuild beneath his feet, a loose thread that could unravel everything. In his eyes, acknowledging Sasha's baby meant jeopardizing his claim to Wiley and Amelia, two children whose custody had become a battlefield. And so, in a moment of cold calculation, Michael drew a line in the sand. He told Sasha he only had two children, and her baby, his baby, was not one of them. The cruelty of that declaration shattered something in Sasha. She had stood by him, protected the secret they shared, endured whispers and rumors to shield his reputation. She had let people believe that Jason was the father. Had accepted the solitude that came with being a single mother, all because Michael had asked her to. But this denial of his own flesh and blood, was a betrayal deeper than any she had imagined. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. It was the obliteration of something sacred. Not just between them, but within her. The warmth she had once felt for Michael curdled into heartbreak and disbelief. Sasha left the Quartermaine mansion that day with a void inside her that no apology could ever fill. She walked to Carly's, the woman who had once taken her in, seen her at her lowest, and given her a semblance of stability. Sasha didn't come to retaliate. She wasn't seeking revenge or looking to tear down Michael out of spite. What she needed was a place to speak, to be heard. To have someone validate the pain of being cast aside, not as a woman, but as the mother of a child whose father refused to see him. Carly listened, stunned into silence as Sasha recounted every painful detail, the conception, the secrecy, the plea for recognition, and the ultimate rejection. And with every word Sasha spoke, Carly's heart broke a little more, not just for her, but for the innocent life caught in the crossfire of Michael's ambition. It didn't take long for the consequences to catch up. What Sasha told Carly could not remain confined within those walls. The truth always finds a way to surface, and in this case, it erupted with devastating force. As the custody hearing approached, word of Michael's paternity denial and the circumstances surrounding Sasha's pregnancy made their way into legal hands. Subpoenas were issued, testimonies taken, and DNA evidence brought forward. Carly, torn between loyalty to her son and her moral compass, found herself standing against Michael, unable to endorse the path he had chosen. She had raised Michael to be better than this, to take responsibility, to value integrity. But what she saw now was a man willing to burn bridges, to erase people, to cling to power even at the cost of his own humanity. In the courtroom, Michael's downfall was swift and unrelenting. Willow watched from across the aisle, her face unreadable. But her silence spoke volumes. Drew, once Michael's reluctant ally, looked away in quiet disgust. Sasha, composed yet visibly trembling, sat with her attorney, her hand protectively cradling the life inside her. And when the judge read the verdict, it felt like the final stroke of a tragedy too long in the making. Michael was stripped of all custodial rights, not just for Sasha's unborn child, but for Wiley and Amelia as well. The court ruled that his behavior demonstrated a disregard for emotional stability and parental responsibility. He had not just failed as a father, he had obliterated any trust the system and those around him had placed in him. In the days that followed, Michael became a ghost in the town he once called home. Friends no longer returned his calls. Business partners hesitated to be seen with him. Even family members, once unwavering in their support, began to keep their distance. The name Michael once carried with pride now hung heavy with shame. Wiley and Amelia, once the heart of his world, were now beyond reach. Their laughter and joy echoing in places he could no longer go. Sasha, meanwhile, found strength in the storm. With Carly's quiet support, she began preparing for motherhood not as a victim, but as a warrior. Her child would not grow up with questions of worth. He would not know the sting of denial. She would give him the love and acceptance his father never did. And Michael, alone in the vast emptiness of the Quartermaine estate, was left with nothing but silence and regret. He had returned to reclaim his family, to rewrite his legacy. But in the end, all he had written was a cautionary tale, of a man who feared the truth more than he loved his children, and who, in trying to save everything, lost it all. Carly never imagined she would hear something so devastating come from the lips of a woman who had once been like a daughter to her. As Sasha recounted every detail, the night of weakness with Michael, the hidden pregnancy, the false narrative involving Jason, and ultimately, Michael's cold-blooded denial of his own unborn child, Carly sat frozen, her breath caught between disbelief and heartbreak. For years, she had fought tooth and nail to protect Michael. Through his darkest moments, she had defended him, excused him, and tried to guide him toward becoming the kind of man any mother could be proud of. She remembered all the nights spent silencing scandal, shielding him from consequences, and convincing the world, and herself, that Michael was strong, honorable, and compassionate. But now, sitting across from Sasha, all Carly could see was a stranger. Michael's actions were not those of a man consumed by guilt or confusion. They were deliberate, calculated, ruthless. He had chosen to erase the existence of his own child for the sake of strategy. He hadn't stumbled, he had drawn a line in the sand and declared that only 2 of his children mattered. Carly felt something fracture inside her, not just the image of her son, but something in the very foundation of what she had spent a lifetime building. It wasn't just a lie. It was a betrayal of every principle she had tried to instill in him. For the first time, Carly chose not to remain silent. She didn't do it out of anger. She didn't do it out of vengeance. She did it because she knew that some truths could no longer be buried. Michael had crossed a line that no mother could ignore, no matter how deep her love. Carly made her decision, not as a mother protecting her child, but as a woman protecting a future grandchild from being erased by his own father. She knew that her testimony would carry weight. She knew it would mean the end of Michael's custody battle, possibly even the end of his credibility in court. But she also knew it was the right thing to do. The fallout came swiftly. On June 2nd, The courtroom brimmed with tension as the highly anticipated custody hearing began. Michael stood tall, confident in appearance but increasingly pale beneath the surface as whispers of Sasha's impending testimony began to circulate. When the judge called Sasha to the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice was steady as she told the truth, every bit of it, from the beginning to the very moment Michael looked her in the eye and told her he would not acknowledge their child. She held nothing back, because she had nothing left to lose. Then came Carly. Her presence stunned everyone. She had not been expected to testify. And her decision to do so sent shockwaves through the room. When she took the stand, she didn't weep, didn't yell. She simply told the truth, that Michael had come to her after rejecting Sasha and admitted that his decision was rooted in fear, not love. That he prioritized his legal position over his moral obligation. That he, in her own words, was not fit to raise any child while he continues to erase the ones that inconvenience him. The final blow came in the form of DNA results confirming Michael's paternity of Sasha's unborn baby. With irrefutable evidence, credible witness testimony, and an overwhelming picture of neglect. The court delivered a ruling that sent tremors through Port Charles. Michael was stripped of all parental rights, not just for Sasha's child, but for Wiley and Amelia as well. The court stated in clear, unequivocal terms that he had demonstrated a pattern of emotional irresponsibility, moral failure, and strategic manipulation that rendered him unfit to hold any legal role as a parent. The term irreversible termination of custodial rights echoed through the courtroom, final and unforgiving. For Michael, it was more than just a legal defeat. It was the annihilation of everything he believed he had reclaimed. He had returned to Port Charles a man on a mission. A father determined to restore what he had lost. But now, in the wake of his own cruelty, he stood alone, a father in name only. Stripped of the very identity he had fought so hard to wield as a weapon. Willow, who had once viewed Michael as her partner in building a sacred, protective family, could hardly lift her eyes to meet his. Her silence was not from shock, but clarity. She saw him now for who he had become, a man who cloaked himself in the righteousness of fatherhood, only to use it as a shield for self-interest. The betrayal stung deeper than any affair ever could. This wasn't about infidelity. It was about character. And in that courtroom, all the illusion of integrity fell away. Drew, too, could no longer feign loyalty. His jaw clenched as he listened, his eyes fixed on the table before him. He had given Michael the benefit of the doubt, had even stood by him in strategic meetings, thinking perhaps the younger man still possessed a flicker of morality. But hearing Sasha's pain, witnessing Carly's heartbreak, and watching Michael's stone-faced silence in the face of damning evidence extinguished whatever trust Drew had left. And then there was Sasha. She sat in the gallery, her hands resting on the small swell of her belly, a quiet strength radiating from her like never before. No longer the woman who once relied on others to validate her worth, Sasha had transformed. The scars left by Michael's rejection did not break her, they galvanized her. As the ruling was read, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, her expression one of peace, not triumph. She had protected her child, not just from legal ambiguity, but from a future shadowed by a father who saw him as collateral damage. Carly watched her with pride. Sasha had grown into the kind of mother she herself had always strived to be, fearless, unyielding in her love, and unafraid to speak truth to power, even when that power wore the face of someone once loved. In the end, Sasha's courage had reshaped everything. And Carly, who had once feared the ripple effects of testifying, now felt no regret. She had chosen the right side of history, and for the first time in a long time, her conscience was clear. Michael left the courthouse in silence, no cameras following, no family rallying at his side. The corridors he once strode down with pride were now reminders of what he had lost. Not just custody. Not just legal rights. But something far more devastating, the respect of his mother, the love of the woman who bore his children, and the opportunity to ever again be called a father without hesitation. In a single courtroom, with a single ruling, the future he had tried to build on the backs of lies came crumbling down. And all that remained was the hollow echo of a name that had once stood for promise, now stained with rejection, denial, and irreversible loss. Once celebrated as a returning hero. Embraced in the warmth of his family's arms and bathed in the illusion of redemption, Michael had now become a man cast into the shadows of disgrace. The transformation was as swift as it was absolute. In the days that followed the courtroom's scathing verdict, Port Charles no longer viewed Michael with the admiration or sympathy that had once colored his reputation. Instead, the looks that followed him were laced with a cold mixture of sorrow, bewilderment, and a profound disgust that words could scarcely express. He wasn't simply avoided, he was disowned in spirit, if not in name. The weight of his betrayal didn't just hang in the air. It clung to him like an invisible cloak, one he could never shed. The children who had once reached for his arms with joy, who had called him Daddy in laughter and tears, now avoided his presence altogether. Wiley no longer asked for him at bedtime, and Amelia, still young but innately intuitive, no longer lit up when he entered the room. The family home that had once pulsed with life, filled with the echoing footsteps of children running down the hall, the sound of toys clattering across the floor, and the occasional bursts of shared laughter, now sat in unbearable silence. Every corner of the Quartermaine mansion reminded Michael of what he once had, and what he had sacrificed at the altar of control and fear. The rooms that had been so full of noise and chaos were now still and cold, mirroring the hollowness inside him. Even the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows seemed muted, as though the house itself mourned the absence of innocence and trust. Michael would walk those corridors in solitude. Past portraits of family members who had made their own mistakes but still managed to cling to the shreds of their humanity. But he had crossed a line so fundamental, so deeply rooted in betrayal, that even those with checkered pasts could not find it in themselves to forgive him. Carly, once his fiercest protector and most unwavering supporter, had gone silent. Her absence spoke volumes. She no longer called, no longer visited. She hadn't cut ties with cruelty, that would have been easier for Michael to face. Instead, she simply drifted away, as though he no longer existed in her world. And perhaps, in some symbolic way, he didn't. The pain of her silence cut deeper than any words could have. It was the silence of heartbreak. The silence of a mother who had done everything to raise a son with integrity, only to watch him destroy everything she believed he stood for. Willow avoided him entirely. There were no texts, no shared visits, no feigned civility for the sake of the children. The woman who had once stood beside him through grief, through love, through the forging of a family, now viewed him as a stranger. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was spiritual. Michael had desecrated the one thing Willow held sacred, the belief that family, above all else, must be protected. And in denying his own unborn child, he hadn't just betrayed Sasha, he had betrayed the very soul of what Willow believed made a father worthy of the title. Sasha, meanwhile, flourished in a quiet strength that had been forged in pain. She focused entirely on the child she carried, nurturing life within her while surrounding herself with peace. Gone were the anxious glances and timid silences. Now she walked with purpose, her hands often resting protectively on her stomach. Her eyes filled with a kind of clarity that came only from surviving betrayal and choosing not to be destroyed by it. She made her appointments alone, prepared the nursery alone, and attended parenting classes with a resolve that impressed everyone around her. She no longer needed Michael's name, approval, or presence. What she needed was a clean break, and she made it without hesitation. Jason, the man who had once stepped in to protect Michael's secret, now remained quietly on the sidelines. He no longer offered cover stories or alibis. His loyalty had limits, and Michael had tested them all. Jason didn't voice judgment, but his distance was its own kind of verdict. He kept a watchful eye on Sasha, offering small acts of help when needed, but mostly he prayed, not just for the child's safe arrival, but that the sins of the father would not stain the future of the innocent. He hoped that this baby, born from chaos, might still have a life filled with the kind of love that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choice. And Michael? He wandered the halls of the Quartermaine estate like a ghost trapped in a life that no longer welcomed him. The walls didn't speak, but they remembered. Every picture on the wall. Every toy left behind in a corner, every room still echoing faintly with memories, they all bore witness to the man he once was, and the man he had become. Meals were eaten in silence. Nights were sleepless. The cold seeped into his bones no matter how many blankets he wrapped around himself. He tried to write letters, to Willow, to Carly, to his children, but the words never came. What could he say? What could possibly bridge the chasm he had carved with his own bare hands? There were moments when he would sit in the nursery he had once prepared for Wiley, long before everything fell apart, and stare at the tiny rocking chair in the corner. He'd run his fingers along the edge of the crib, remembering the night he assembled it with trembling hands and hopeful eyes. Now it sat empty, a relic of a life that had slipped through his fingers. He had once believed that being a father was his redemption, that through his children, he could find purpose, legacy, maybe even forgiveness. But he had gambled it all. Every last thread of connection, for the illusion of control. And he had lost. What haunted him most wasn't the court ruling or the social exile. It was the sound, or rather, the absence of sound. The laughter of Wiley. The babbling of Amelia. The rhythmic thump of little feet across the hardwood floor. Those were the sounds of life, of family, of meaning. And now, all that remained was the hum of central heating, the creak of old floorboards, and the soft, ceaseless whisper of regret. He tried, for a time, to salvage what he could. To reach out. To beg for forgiveness in quiet moments when he thought maybe, just maybe, someone would hear him. But there was no forgiveness for what he had done, not because others were incapable of it, but because he had yet to earn it. He had yet to show remorse that ran deeper than fear. He had yet to understand that fatherhood was not a legal right, not a title one could defend in court. It was a sacred trust, and he had shattered it. So Michael remained in the Quartermaine mansion, not as a father, not as a son, but as a man learning, far too late, that power means nothing when it costs you everything that truly matters. The world outside moved on. Children grew. Women healed. Bonds were rebuilt in his absence. But Michael remained behind, a man with everything but the one thing he had once taken for granted, the right to call himself a father.